I held my breath, hoping the intruder wouldn't find me, as the footsteps stopped right in front of the couch where I was hiding. One stormy night, I found myself home alone, enjoying a quiet evening with a movie. The thunder outside was booming, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the darkened room. The comforting sounds of the film helped me ignore the ferocity of the storm raging outside. It was supposed to be a peaceful night, just me and my favorite movie. The storm had been forecasted, and my family was away for the weekend, leaving me to enjoy the house to myself. I felt a mix of independence and slight unease, as the storm's intensity kept me on edge. Nonetheless, I settled into the couch, wrapping myself in a blanket and letting the movie distract me from the howling wind and crashing thunder. Just as I was getting engrossed in the plot, a sudden, sharp sound interrupted my focus. I paused the movie, straining to hear over the storm. The sound had been distinct, like breaking glass. My first thought was that it must have been the wind, or maybe something had fallen outside. But the possibility of something more sinister nagged at the back of my mind. Curiosity and a growing sense of unease led me to get up and check the source of the noise. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way to the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet except for the distant rumble of thunder. When I reached the kitchen, my heart skipped a beat. One of the windows was shattered, shards of glass scattered across the floor. Panic began to set in as I noticed wet footprints leading from the broken window to the living room. The sight sent a chill down my spine. Someone had entered my house during the storm, and they were still inside. I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I needed to hide, and quickly. I turned off the kitchen light and moved as quietly as possible back to the living room. The footprints were still wet, glistening in the sporadic flashes of lightning. My hands trembled as I turned off the lights in the living room and crouched behind the couch, trying to make myself as small and silent as possible. The realization that an intruder was in my home was almost too much to bear. The darkness of the room enveloped me as I hid behind the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to control my breathing, but fear made it difficult. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the house, each step deliberate and slow. I could also hear a low murmur, as if the intruder was talking to themselves or searching for something specific. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the living room. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that the intruder wouldn't find me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew staying hidden was my best chance. The sound of the footsteps was almost unbearable, each one bringing the intruder closer to my hiding spot. The murmur grew louder, more distinct, but I couldn't make out the words. The suspense was agonizing. The footsteps stopped right in front of the couch where I was hiding. I held my breath, my entire body tense with fear. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder outside. I could feel the intruder's presence just inches away, and I prayed that they wouldn't look behind the couch. Seconds felt like hours as I waited, listening intently for any sign of movement. The low murmur continued, barely audible now, and I strained to catch any words. My mind raced with terrifying scenarios, each one worse than the last. The fear was suffocating, and I fought to keep myself from making any noise. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps started again, moving away from the couch. Relief washed over me, but I remained frozen in place, too scared to move. The intruder's footsteps echoed through the house as they walked toward the front door. The sound of the front door opening and closing was almost surreal. I waited a few more minutes, straining to hear any other noises that might indicate the intruder had returned. The house was silent except for the storm outside, and the tension in my body slowly began to release. I carefully peeked over the couch, scanning the darkened living room for any sign of the intruder. Seeing nothing, I stood up and quietly made my way to the front door. It was closed, but the broken window in the kitchen was a stark reminder of what had just happened. My hands trembled as I locked the front door and checked the other windows to make sure they were secure. The fear hadn't completely left me, but I felt a small measure of safety now that the intruder was gone. I knew I needed to call the police, but my mind was still reeling from the encounter. Taking a deep breath, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The police arrived quickly, their presence a welcome relief after the terrifying ordeal. I explained what had happened, describing the sound of breaking glass, the wet footprints, and the intruder's footsteps and murmurs. The officers searched the house thoroughly, but found no one. The intruder had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. The officers took my statement and assured me that they would increase patrols in the area. They suggested I stay with a friend or family member for the night, but I was reluctant to leave my home. Despite their reassurances, the fear lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I thanked the officers and watched as they drove away, their flashing lights disappearing into the storm. The house felt empty and ominous, the shadows seeming to grow darker in the aftermath of the intruder's visit. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, but I was determined to stay vigilant. In the days that followed, I remained on high alert, constantly checking the locks and peering out the windows. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge, and I found it difficult to relax. The fear of the intruder's return haunted me, and I couldn't shake the image of those wet footprints leading through my home. I began to change my routines, avoiding being home alone at night and installing additional security measures. The sense of safety I once felt in my own home was shattered, replaced by a constant state of anxiety. Friends and family tried to reassure me, but the lingering fear was always there, a dark shadow that followed me everywhere. The experience had left a deep mark on me, altering my sense of security and trust. I couldn't help but wonder who the intruder was and what they had been looking for. The unanswered questions only fueled my paranoia, making it difficult to move past the incident. The mystery of the nighttime intruder remained unsolved. Despite the police investigation and increased patrols, there were no leads or clues to the intruder's identity or motive. The thought of someone breaking into my home, walking through my rooms, and then disappearing without a trace was deeply unsettling. I often replayed the events of that night in my mind, searching for any detail I might have missed. The fear and uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the vulnerability I felt. The storm, the broken window, the wet footprints, and the low murmur of the intruder. It all played out like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Even now, the memory of that night sends chills down my spine. The fear of the unknown intruder and the possibility of their return linger in the back of my mind, a shadow that never fully disappears. My sense of security has been forever changed, and the night I face the intruder will always haunt me. Think you can handle more? Here comes the next bone-chilling account. Subscribe and drop a comment if you're still watching. Story 2. As the dark figure at the end of the hallway began to move slowly toward me, an icy chill swept over me, and I froze in fear, unable to move or speak. It was a quiet night, and I was home alone, relishing the peace and solitude. The house was calm, with only the occasional sound of the wind outside. I settled into the living room with a good book, enjoying the rare moment of tranquility. The calmness of the evening was soothing, and I found myself getting lost in the story. The silence was comforting, a perfect backdrop to my reading. Little did I know, that peaceful night was about to take a terrifying turn. As I turned another page, a creaking noise suddenly pierced the silence, coming from the hallway. My initial thought was that it must be the house settling. I tried to focus on my book, but the sound nagged at my mind, refusing to be ignored. Curiosity and a touch of concern got the better of me. I placed my book down and stood up, listening intently. The creaking noise persisted, irregular and unsettling. With a sense of apprehension, I decided to investigate the source of the noise. I made my way to the hallway, each step filled with a growing sense of unease. The house felt different, the air heavier, as if something unseen was watching me. My heart began to race as I reached for the hallway light switch. When the light flickered on, I saw a dark figure standing at the end of the hallway, near my bedroom. The sight stopped me in my tracks, and a wave of fear washed over me. The figure was tall and shadowy, with no discernible features, just an ominous presence that filled me with dread. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to move or make a sound. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. The figure remained still, its silent form exuding a malevolent energy. I could feel my pulse quicken, each beat echoing loudly in the quiet house. As I stood frozen in fear, the dark figure began to move slowly toward me. Each step it took seemed to heighten the terror that gripped me. The air grew colder, an icy chill enveloping me as the figure approached. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and I felt a suffocating sense of dread. The figure's slow, deliberate movements were horrifying. It felt as if time had slowed down, every second stretching into an eternity of fear. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to break free from the paralyzing terror that held me captive. Just as the figure was almost upon me, the hallway light flickered. The sudden change in lighting broke my paralysis, but instead of giving me relief, it deepened my fear. The flickering light cast eerie shadows, making the figure's approach even more menacing. The flickering light continued, creating a disorienting and terrifying atmosphere. Each time the light dimmed, the figure seemed to vanish, only to reappear closer when the light returned. My fear reached its peak, and I felt a scream building in my throat. Then, in a moment of darkness, the figure completely disappeared. The hallway was empty, as if the figure had never been there. The light stabilized, but the cold chill remained, and I stood there, trembling and confused. The disappearance of the figure should have brought relief, but instead, it left me feeling even more vulnerable. The hallway, once familiar and safe, now felt like a place of nightmares. I needed to get out of there, to find a place where I could feel secure. With my heart still racing, I ran back to the living room, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. I locked all the doors and windows, my hands shaking as I secured the house. The living room felt slightly safer, but the fear lingered, refusing to leave. I turned on every light in the living room, hoping the brightness would chase away the terror. I couldn't bring myself to return to the hallway, let alone the bedroom. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night. I huddled on the couch, clutching my book for comfort, but the story that had once been a source of enjoyment now seemed irrelevant. My mind kept replaying the sight of the dark figure, the icy chill, and the flickering light. I was trapped in a cycle of fear, unable to find any peace. The hours passed slowly, each minute dragging on as I sat in the living room, wide awake. Every creak and gust of wind outside made me jump, my nerves on edge. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison of fear. I checked the locks repeatedly, my paranoia growing with each passing hour. The thought of the dark figure returning haunted me, making it impossible to relax. My eyes were constantly drawn to the hallway, expecting to see the figure reappear at any moment. As the night wore on, exhaustion set in, but sleep was out of the question. The fear was too intense, the memory of the figure too vivid. I felt a constant sense of dread, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have been in my house. Finally, the first light of dawn began to creep into the living room. The sight of the rising sun brought a small measure of relief, but the fear remained. I had survived the night, but the terror of what I had experienced was far from over. With the daylight came a sense of safety, but it was fragile and easily shattered. I knew that the figure could return, that the night could bring back the same horrors. The thought of facing another night alone in the house filled me with anxiety. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, to convince myself that it was just my imagination or a trick of the light. But the fear was too real, the experience too vivid. The figure in the hallway had left a mark on me, a scar that wouldn't easily heal. The mystery of the dark figure remained unsolved. Despite my attempts to find an explanation, I was left with more questions than answers. Who or what was the figure? Why had it appeared in my house? And what did it want? The lack of answers only deepened my fear. The experience changed the way I viewed my home. The place that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a place of potential danger. Every night, I feared the figure's return, the thought of another encounter haunting my thoughts. Even now, the memory of that night sends chills down my spine. The figure in the hallway and the icy chill it brought with it are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond the edge of our perception. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night I faced the unknown and barely escaped with my sanity. Stay in your seat. The next horror story is just about to begin. Make sure to subscribe and share your scariest moment in the comments. Story 3. As the power flickered back on, the whispering voice that had called my name from the darkness abruptly ceased, leaving me trembling and wide-eyed in the oppressive silence. It was a rainy night, and I was home alone. The storm outside was relentless, with rain pounding against the windows and occasional rumbles of thunder shaking the house. I tried to enjoy the solitude, but there was an uneasy feeling in the air. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. I fumbled around for candles, trying to calm myself as I lit them and placed them around the room. The soft, flickering light provided some comfort, but the feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. As I searched for a flashlight, I heard a soft, whispering voice calling my name. I froze, straining to listen. The voice was faint but unmistakable, sending a chill down my spine. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, making it impossible to pinpoint its origin. The fear crept in slowly, building with each passing second. I called out, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the whispering continued. It was an eerie, unsettling sound, as if someone was standing right next to me, whispering directly into my ear. I looked around, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but saw nothing. The candles cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of unease. The voice persisted, a constant, insistent whisper that filled me with dread. The whispering voice grew louder and more insistent, making it impossible to ignore. It called my name over and over, each repetition sending a wave of fear through me. The voice seemed to come from all directions, creating a sense of disorientation and helplessness. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just the storm and my imagination running wild. But the voice was too real, too present. The fear escalated, my heart pounding in my chest as the voice continued its relentless whispering. I felt trapped, unable to escape the sound that surrounded me. Desperation set in as I realized I had no control over what was happening. The voice was all-consuming, drowning out the sound of the storm and filling the house with an oppressive presence. I needed to do something, anything, to break free from the fear that was gripping me. In a moment of clarity, I grabbed my phone and called a friend. My hands were shaking as I explained the terrifying situation, my voice trembling with fear. My friend tried to reassure me, telling me it was probably just the storm or my mind playing tricks on me, but the whispering continued, louder and more insistent. As I talked to my friend, I could hear the voice in the background, a constant reminder of the terror that surrounded me. The disjointed phrases and persistent repetition of my name made it clear that this was no ordinary fear. The voice was real, and it was coming from somewhere within the house. My friend suggested turning on all the lights and staying on the phone until the power came back, but the fear was overwhelming. The voice seemed to be getting closer, its whispers more urgent and demanding. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, my body trembling uncontrollably. The voice felt closer now, almost as if it were right next to me. Each whisper sent shivers down my spine, and I could feel the icy breath of the unseen presence. The fear was suffocating, my heart racing as I tried to maintain some semblance of calm. Every shadow seemed to move, and the flickering candlelight only added to the sense of dread. I clutched the phone tightly, my friend's voice a distant comfort against the overwhelming fear. The whispers became more urgent, more demanding, and I could feel the presence closing in on me. I tried to keep my focus on my friend's voice, but the fear was too strong. I could barely hear them over the sound of the whispers, which seemed to echo through the entire house. The sensation of being watched was unbearable, and I felt my grip on reality slipping. Suddenly, the power came back on, flooding the room with light. The whispering voice stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. I was left standing in the middle of the room, my body trembling and my mind racing to process what had just happened. The bright lights provided a sense of relief, but the fear lingered. I scanned the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but I was alone. The oppressive presence was gone, but the memory of the whispers and the chilling feeling of being watched remained. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a lingering dread. I thanked my friend for staying on the phone with me, but I could hear the concern in their voice. The fear hadn't completely left me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to relax for the rest of the night. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, with all the lights on. The fear of the voice returning kept me on edge, and I couldn't bring myself to close my eyes. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made me jump. The memory of the whispers was still fresh, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone and listening to my friend talk, trying to distract myself from the fear. The night seemed to stretch on forever, each minute feeling like an eternity. I kept glancing at the shadows, expecting the voice to return at any moment. The fear was all-consuming, and I felt a constant sense of unease. The memory of the whispers and the chilling presence left me feeling vulnerable and exposed. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, but I also couldn't stay like this forever. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I felt a small measure of relief. The fear hadn't completely left me, but the daylight brought a sense of safety. I finally ended the call with my friend, thanking them for staying with me through the night. The experience had left a lasting impact on me. I found myself constantly on edge, wary of every shadow and sound. The fear of power outages became a constant source of anxiety, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice might return. I began to avoid being alone in the house, especially during storms. The memory of that night haunted me, a constant reminder of the terror I had felt. The voice in the dark had left a mark on me, changing the way I viewed my home and my sense of safety. The mystery of the whispering voice remained unsolved. Despite my attempts to rationalize what had happened, I was left with more questions than answers. Who or what had been calling my name? Why had the voice appeared, and what did it want? The lack of answers only deepened my fear. The experience had altered my perception of being alone in the dark. The once comforting silence of a power outage now filled me with dread. The fear of the unknown presence haunted me, a constant reminder of the night I faced the voice in the dark. Even now, the memory of that night sends chills down my spine. The whispering voice and the feeling of being watched are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond the edge of our perception. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night I faced the unknown and barely escaped with my sanity. Prepare yourself. The fear continues with our next haunting narrative. Subscribe and let us know in the comments what keeps you up at night. Story 4. As the shadowy figure inside the mist-covered mirror knocked on the glass and whispered words I couldn't understand, I felt a paralyzing fear that kept me rooted to the spot. I inherited an old mirror from my grandmother, who always said it was special. It was an ornate, antique piece with an intricately carved frame. Despite her insistence on its significance, I never believed in such things. To me, it was just another heirloom, a piece of furniture with no real value beyond its age. One night, while I was home alone, I was getting ready for bed. The house was quiet, and the only sounds were the occasional creaks and groans of the old building settling. I had placed the mirror in the guest room, thinking it would add a touch of elegance to the space. Little did I know, That night would change my perception of the mirror forever. As I was about to turn off the lights, I heard a faint knocking sound coming from the direction of the guest room. At first, I thought it might be a branch tapping against the window, or perhaps the house settling. But the sound persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The house seemed to grow quieter with each step, the knocking sound growing louder in the stillness. My heart began to race, a sense of unease creeping over me. When I reached the guest room, I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. The room was dark, but the faint light from the hallway cast eerie shadows on the walls. The knocking continued, drawing my eyes to the source. There, in the corner of the room, stood the old mirror. It was covered in a layer of mist, the glass fogged up as if someone had been breathing on it. The sight was both strange and unsettling. I moved closer, my pulse quickening with each step. The mist swirled on the surface of the mirror, creating ghostly patterns that seemed to dance in the dim light. As I approached, I could feel the temperature in the room drop. A chill ran down my spine, and I wrapped my arms around myself for warmth. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. I stared at the mirror, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The mist on the glass seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and my unease grew with each passing second. I was about to turn away when something caught my eye. Through the mist, I saw a shadowy figure inside the mirror. It was indistinct at first, just a vague shape moving behind the fogged glass. But as I watched, the figure became clearer, more defined. It was a humanoid shape, dark and menacing, as if it was made of shadows themselves. The figure seemed to be trying to get out of the mirror, pressing its hands against the glass and knocking. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me as I realized I was not alone. The figure's movements were slow and deliberate, each knock resonating through the room. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure's eyes, or what passed for eyes, seemed to lock onto mine, and I felt a deep, primal terror. It was as if the figure was trying to communicate with me, but its presence was overwhelming, filling me with a sense of dread. As I stood frozen in fear, the shadowy figure began to whisper. The words were unintelligible, a chilling murmur that seemed to come from deep within the mirror. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, a blend of desperation and malice that sent shivers down my spine. The whispers echoed around the room, creating an oppressive atmosphere. I felt a suffocating pressure in my chest, as if the very air was thick with the figure's presence. My legs trembled, and I gripped the edge of the table for support, unable to tear my eyes away from the mirror. The shadowy figure's movements became more frantic, its hands slapping against the glass in a desperate attempt to break free. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot. The whispers seemed to fill my mind, drowning out all rational thought. It felt as if the figure was trying to reach out to me, to pull me into the mirror's dark depths. The terror was overwhelming, a primal fear that consumed me entirely. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, I broke free from my paralysis and ran out of the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The whispers and knocking continued, muffled now by the closed door, but still terrifyingly persistent. I backed away, my heart racing, struggling to catch my breath. I stumbled into the living room, my mind racing to process what I had just seen. The fear was so intense, I could barely think straight. I sank into a chair, my whole body trembling. The house felt like a different place now, filled with an unseen menace that I couldn't escape. The sense of dread was suffocating, and I knew I needed help. Desperate for some reassurance, I grabbed my phone and called my mother. As soon as she answered, I blurted out everything that had happened, my words tumbling over each other in my haste. She listened quietly, her voice calm and soothing despite the terror in my own. When I finished, she took a deep breath and told me something that made my blood run cold. My grandmother had always believed the mirror was a portal to the other world, a gateway through which spirits could pass. She had kept it covered most of the time, fearing what might come through if it was left exposed. I had never believed in such things, but now I wasn't so sure. My mother urged me to get rid of the mirror as soon as possible, to remove the threat from my home. Her words offered some comfort, but the fear remained. I promised her I would deal with the mirror first thing in the morning. For now, I needed to survive the night. I hung up the phone, feeling a little less alone but still deeply shaken. The next morning, I wasted no time. As soon as the sun was up, I went back to the guest room. The room felt different in the daylight, less threatening, but the memory of the previous night was still fresh in my mind. I approached the mirror cautiously, half expecting to see the shadowy figure again, but the glass was clear and the room was silent. I wrapped the mirror in a blanket, determined to get rid of it once and for all. I loaded it into my car and drove to the nearest antique shop. The shop owner gave me a curious look as I explained that I wanted to donate the mirror, but he didn't ask any questions. I left the shop feeling a sense of relief, but the fear and unease still lingered. I returned home, trying to reclaim my sense of normalcy. The house felt safer without the mirror, but the memory of what I had seen was hard to shake. I couldn't help but wonder if the shop owner would experience the same terror, or if the figure would remain trapped in the mirror forever. The mystery of the cursed mirror remained unsolved. Despite my efforts to move on, I couldn't forget the shadowy figure and the chilling whispers. I often wondered about the mirror's true nature and the stories my grandmother might have heard about it. The lack of answers only deepened my fear and curiosity. I found myself avoiding mirrors, always wary of what might be lurking just beyond the surface. The experience had left a mark on me, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that could be hidden in the most ordinary objects. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still out there, waiting for another opportunity to cross over. Even now, the memory of that night sends chills down my spine. The cursed mirror and the shadowy figure it contained are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond our perception. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night I faced the unknown and barely escaped with my sanity. But wait, there's more. Brace yourself for the next spine-chilling tale. And if you're enjoying the scares, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments. Story 5. As I turned the flashlight towards the back of the basement, a pale, translucent figure stared back at me, whispering, "Help me," sending a chill down my spine and freezing me in fear. It was a quiet evening, and I was home alone, finishing some work at my desk. The house was peaceful, with only the occasional sound of the wind outside. My parents were out for the night, leaving me to enjoy the solitude. The stillness of the house was comforting, allowing me to focus on my tasks. The basement had always been a place I avoided. It was old, with creaky wooden stairs and a damp, musty smell. My parents had mentioned that it had a strange energy, but I had never paid much attention to their comments. To me, it was just a basement, until that night. As I worked, a strange sound interrupted my concentration. It was a rhythmic knocking, faint at first but growing louder with each passing second. The sound seemed to be coming from the basement, echoing through the floorboards. My heart began to race, and a sense of unease settled over me. Curiosity and apprehension battled within me, but eventually, curiosity won. I decided to investigate the source of the noise. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, I made my way to the basement door. The knocking continued, steady and persistent, as if someone was trying to get out. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, listening to the sound. The darkness below seemed to pulse with each knock, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Taking a deep breath, I switched on the flashlight and began to descend the creaky wooden stairs. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight started to flicker, casting erratic shadows on the basement walls. The knocking stopped abruptly, plunging the basement into an eerie silence. The flickering light added to the tension, making the shadows dance and twist in unsettling ways. The silence was deafening, and my unease grew with each passing moment. I scanned the basement, the beam of the flashlight moving erratically as it struggled to stay lit. The old furniture and boxes seemed to loom out of the darkness, their shapes distorted by the flickering light. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a few cautious steps forward. The air was cold, and the musty smell was stronger down here. I strained to listen for any other sounds, but all I could hear was the erratic flickering of the flashlight and my own ragged breathing. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, raising goosebumps on my skin. I froze, the flashlight flickering wildly in my hand. Then, I heard it, a soft whisper right next to my ear, saying, "Help me." The voice was faint but clear, and it sent a wave of terror through me. I spun around, trying to see where the whisper had come from, but there was nothing there. The cold breeze lingered, and I could feel my pulse quicken. The whisper echoed in my mind, the plea for help filled with desperation and fear. The flashlight flickered again, and I could feel my hands shaking. I knew I needed to get out of the basement, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the spot. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and I could barely think straight. Gathering my courage, I turned the flashlight towards the back of the basement. There, in the dim light, I saw a pale, translucent figure standing by the wall. It was a human shape, but ghostly and ethereal, with empty eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. The figure was motionless at first, but then it started to move, its form shifting and shimmering in the flickering light. The figure raised a hand and knocked on the wall, the sound echoing through the basement. My breath caught in my throat as I realized this was the source of the knocking. The figure's lips moved, and I heard the whisper again, "Help me," more insistent this time. The fear was paralyzing, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The figure's presence was overwhelming, filling the basement with an icy chill. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the ghostly apparition. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, I broke free from my paralysis and bolted up the stairs. The flashlight flickered violently as I ran, casting erratic shadows that seemed to chase me. I reached the top and slammed the basement door shut, locking it with trembling hands. My heart was racing, and I struggled to catch my breath. The house was eerily silent, but the memory of the pale figure and its desperate whisper lingered in my mind. I leaned against the door, trying to process what I had just seen. The fear was still there, a heavy weight on my chest, making it hard to think clearly. I knew I couldn't stay near the basement. I moved to the living room, where the light was brighter and the shadows less threatening. The sense of dread was still overwhelming, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the ghostly figure reappear. In my desperation, I grabbed my phone and called my parents. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to dial the number correctly. When they finally answered, I blurted out everything that had happened, my voice trembling with fear. They listened quietly, and I could hear the concern in their voices. My mother tried to reassure me, telling me that the basement had always had a strange energy. She said that while they had never seen anything themselves, they often felt uneasy down there. Her words did little to calm my nerves, but it was comforting to know I wasn't entirely alone in my experience. My parents urged me to stay calm and keep the basement door locked. They promised to come home as soon as they could. The fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, but having someone to talk to made it a little more bearable. I stayed on the phone with them, clinging to their voices for comfort. The next morning, I avoided the basement entirely. The thought of going back down there filled me with dread, and I couldn't shake the memory of the pale figure and its haunting whisper. I made sure the door was securely locked and tried to go about my day as normally as possible. But the fear lingered. Every time I passed by the basement door, a chill ran down my spine. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at every small noise and shadow. The house, once a place of comfort and safety, now felt like a prison filled with unseen dangers. I decided to avoid the basement at all costs. Whatever was down there, I didn't want to encounter it again. The fear and unease became a constant part of my life, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still down there, waiting. The mystery of the pale, translucent figure and the strange energy in the basement remained unsolved. Despite my efforts to move on, I couldn't forget the chilling experience. The lack of answers only deepened my fear and curiosity. Who or what was the figure? Why was it there? And what did it want from me? The experience had changed my perception of the house. The basement, once just a storage space, had become a place of terror. I avoided it at all costs, but the memory of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers lurking in the dark corners of our world. Even now, the thought of the basement sends chills down my spine. The pale figure and its desperate whisper are long gone, but their echo remains, a haunting reminder of the night I faced the unknown and barely escaped with my sanity. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the night I encountered the voice in the dark.